Welcome back to Business Tonight. Is language coming in the way of Anshu Jain's rise to the top? And is it fair? That's the question we ask on the show tonight. Top CEOs bat for Jain's appointment as CEO. Anshu Jain is in the news, doesn't speak German, and why are we talking about that? That's because there's speculation that this could possibly come in the way of eventually taking the CEO post at the multinational bank, headquartered in Germany. Is this a linguistic issue or could it be prejudice? That's what we put across to our entire panel of guests. We have Deepak Parekh on the show, who joins us from Mumbai. We also have Vindi Banga joining us from London. David Buick of BGC Partners as well from London. We've got Mr. Gopalakrishnan joining us from Tata Sun once again from Mumbai, and also a view coming in from Egon Zender. We've got Rajiv Vasudevan joining us to give us a perspective from a search firm or headhunting side. Let's start with Mr. Deepak Parekh, who's kindly agreed to be with us live on the show. Mr. Parekh, what is your reaction to reports coming out across Europe that language could come in the way of Anshu Jain's rise to the top? Is it fair?
I have known Anshu Jain since many, many years, and he's done exceptionally well in Deutsche Bank. I've been impressed with his capabilities and his performance and his commitment. He's a great guy. And I think he's today managing 80%. We understand he's managing 80% of Deutsche Bank's business. When a position, even if it's a German company or a German bank, which is very conservative, if a senior position is there, the board should not take into account the color of the skin or the background of the individual, the country he belongs to, but must look at performance, his commitment, his integrity, his understanding of the business, his vision, his capability. And I think Anshu fits the bill. And the fact that he's an Indian should not come in his way, according to me.
Right, Mr. Gopalakrishnan, to bring you in, how do you react to this? As a person who has, been participating in a whole lot of management discussions, you're author of several books. What does this sort of a situation reflect? And based on what Mr. Parekh is saying, what would you like to say on this subject?
Well, I'm not able to comment on Anshu Jain specifically, and I'm not sure whether in Deutsche Bank the language of business is English or German. But let me make the broader point, as you said. Many international companies, as they grew more and more global, have switched to using English as the language of their business. If you look at Siemens, or you look at Fiat, or you look at Sony, these are examples of companies which have consciously decided that to be truly global, they will switch to English as their language of business, and therefore the lack of knowledge of English does not will be a disadvantage, but the lack of knowledge of Japanese or German or Italian would not be a disadvantage. I think that's the direction in which many companies are moving.
Okay, to London to get a view from Mr. Vindi Banga. Mr. Banga, we like to refer to you as a global Indian. What do you think? Is knowing a particular language crucial for a job in multinational banking? This is not the Foreign Service, or maybe it is the Foreign Service.
Well, I think, first of all, I'd like to respond by taking this more generally, and then I can come back specifically to the bank. I think the most important question is knowing a local language critical to what you do or what the job is? Now, I can understand, Shaili, if you were in the entertainment industry or you were in the broadcasting industry, knowing the local language would be essential for your job. But if I take working for a multinational or working for a bank, I cannot see how knowing a local language is important to how you do your job. Quite the opposite, in fact.
Actually, Mr. Banga, it's Sid here, but hold on, we want to stay in London and get a view from David Buick. David, so can a language barrier mean so much to a bank as global, as massive, as all-pervasive as Deutsche?
It is very, very unusual for a German bank to appoint anybody but a German as chief executive officer of that bank, because obviously the German language is different from what we describe as the international trading and dealing language in the world. But in modern days, I don't think that matters one little bit. And if he ticks the boxes in terms of his ability to prove that he is the best man for the job, whether he can speak German or not, I think is completely irrelevant, because I don't believe for one single minute that all the other members of the Vorstand or the General Committee of Deutsche Bank have got more than a smattering of English. I mean, I don't wish to be arrogant here, but English is the international language of the world. That is the language that most business is conducted in. Of course, as you say, Germany has a huge presence in its own country. But you know what they say, the art of good management is delegation. So if you're dealing with German-speaking companies, clearly Mr. Jain is not the right person to be dealing with these people. But if he's got a good management team around him, then the language issue or barrier does not become a problem.
Appreciate your views there, David Buick. I like what you said, that the art of management is actually good delegation. I'm going to put that aspect to somebody who actually goes out there and hunts CEOs for various organizations in India, and it's an agency that does this globally, Egon Zehnder. Rajiv Vasudevan, let's just get a perspective from you. Do you actually face questions from employers about language issues, about potential high-level hires?
I would say that typically when we are working on searches and we are being briefed by our clients, probably the two most critical things that our clients look for are what we call competency fit and cultural fit. And when we talk about cultural fit, I think in certain situations, language can actually be an important ingredient of the cultural aspects of a company. So I think language is probably a subset of culture.
Okay, Mr. Parekh, I want to come back to you. Here we have a case of what is being called a language barrier. Do you agree, in today's globalized world, something that we all have been reflecting on, we must have such preoccupations at all? I mean, there are enough examples of, using interpreters across nations, not even companies or banks. We're talking about heads of state who can't speak another language, whether it's from China or Japan or some part of Europe, but yet they're managing to do good business.
I think so, because I think at that level most Germans speak English. Today English is widely spoken in Germany, and particularly in the business community and the banking community. You can't be a global company and only speak a local language. So I think it's more of and even in the political arena, I'm sure that most of the Germans do speak English. I'm sure they would like to speak in German. But if someone doesn't speak, particularly if you take the Japanese organization, every Japanese who comes to see me as a CEO brings an interpreter.
David, back to you in London. Merit, business sense should be enough to work with politicians in all kinds of corridors of power, all kinds of situations, and then you've got interpreters.
There should be no other considerations. It would be disgraceful if there were. If he doesn't get the job because he isn't the best man for the job, so be it. But any thought that he didn't get the job because his knowledge of the German language is insufficient or that he's not a German is completely and utterly ridiculous in 2010. And I don't believe for 1 minute that any criticism of that level will ever be levelled at the German Board of Directors. Can't happen.
Okay, Mr. Banga, what does this tell us about the concept of globalization?
Well, I think globalization requires international understanding. And one of the ways to do that is a common language. I think that's why you see that English has become the common global language for business all over the world. It just helps people understand each other and is the common language today.
I think that's also something that Mr. Gopalakrishnan was referring to right at the start. Mr. Krishnan, I want to come back to you. What does this reflect? Are we trying to suggest in some ways this sort of a discussion or report in Europe is suggesting that we're still a few decades behind in our thinking? Suddenly, after talking about being in a greatly interconnected world, permeable businesses and fast cash.
Not really, because, we talk about globalized corporations, but it is entirely possible for a company to be evolving into a global corporation and has not yet made the decision to switch to an international language like English. There are French companies which probably have their language of French. So I think it's when the internal mindset is realigned to saying to be truly global, we are going to switch to English as the language. It's at that stage only that this will cease to be an issue. Otherwise, it does become an important criterion, because for the new person not to speak the language and understand the nuances of the sociology of the company will be very, very difficult.
So that's an relevant point. Only if there's a new person, not somebody who's sort of been around doing that work and sort of growing up in the bank. I think that's the point that you're alluding to. Let's get Mr. Vasudevan in now. Rajiv Vasudevan, look at this whole story and tell us how will you react to this whole aspect. Need to know your internals even if you don't know the language.
Yeah, I mean, to my mind, I think the language barrier of today is English. If you don't speak English, then probably it's difficult to get a global job in any large company. So English is becoming more and more the business language, which is the global business language. So I think if you don't speak English, you're at a disadvantage, clearly. But I think if you speak English, that's more and more the situation where global companies are looking at that being the key criteria for hiring.
Mr. Parekh, we've been chatting about Anshu Jain for the last, 6-8 minutes or so. If you were to meet him tomorrow, what would you say to Anshu Jain?
No. I think my particular view is merit, as I said, is the most important criteria for a CEO, irrespective of where he comes from. That's the message. Hang in there and good luck.
Hang in there and good luck, says Deepak Parekh. Says he's seen Anshu sort of grow all the way and he would like to wish him good luck. Well, having said that, to come back to another aspect, which is, again, the thinking, the changing mindsets. Have they in some way changed post-recession? Is there a sort of different thinking on what is being an insular world? Mr. Vindi Banga, sitting in London, and since you've sort of moved a little bit from being a global Indian into a financial services space, this insular thinking is not going to get us very much high out there.
Anybody who in this day and age would insist on something like this or think about something like this, in a sense is reflecting a degree of insularity. And that insularity is quite out of place in today's global world, where actually what we should be fostering is interdependence and connectedness, which comes through a common language.
Hey, David, let's get straight to it. Who exactly does not want to see Mr. Anshu Jain as Chief Executive Officer of Deutsche Bank?
As I say, the only people I think who wouldn't want to see him would be those people who are die-hard-in-the-wool nationalists, who believe that it requires a German person at the top to deal with the lion's share of the non-investment part of Deutsche Bank's balance sheet, which, as I say, is retail banking. And those are the only people who could possibly query his credentials not to take over from Josef Ackermann.
Mr. Gopalakrishnan, David Buick there, rather, I would say, vociferous about the subject. But how ironic do you feel the situation is, Mr. Gopalakrishnan, where the world is going global, but there is a perception of local thinking that emerges in this entire report? Do you think towards selecting the boss here, the idea of people going local to global is more important rather than to have a flip side where countries are allowed to have their own value systems when otherwise, in most other cases, they would like to be looked at as a global entity?
I don't think it's appropriate to look at it through those lenses. Personally, I feel that you have to look at an entity in its totality. And just like I may be very traditional and Indian in my personal value system and the way I live at home, but I may be perfectly international in the way I interact with people across the world. It's possible for a company to be very Italian or very French and yet be very international. It's possible. I think many companies in the world are going through a process of adjustment, and to allow them the time to make that adjustment is what is required. If you go back 20 years, you could not find a single national company, non-Anglo-American, which would act, think and use English as the official language. Today you find plenty of them. We are particularly touchy in India, I have to add, because even our Indian companies think and act in English. English is our language of business, it's the language of government very often, and so we take it for granted. And I don't think we ought to be so touchy, frankly.
Okay, everyone, thanks so much for joining us. Certainly, there's no verdict on this one because this is still a developing story. This could be an appointment still about 2 years away, yet it's raising all those big questions, and it will be most watched, certainly by everyone here on our panel, that this should be a fair process. That's a wrap on that discussion, but plenty more coming up.
Lots more.